Often regarded as one of the greatest guitarists of all time, Eric Clapton's life narrative combines severe personal hardships with enormous musical accomplishment. His struggles with alcohol and drug abuse, his turbulent relationship with Pattie Boyd, and the tragic death of his son Connor present a picture of a man who reached his lowest points and turned to art for solace. Eric Clapton was becoming one of the biggest names in rock in the colorful but unstable 1960s. His reputation for guitar skill and profound blues influence grew with bands like the Yardbirds, Cream, and later his solo work. He would soon discover, however, that celebrity has two sides. The indulgences of the rock and roll lifestyle engulfed Clapton, a society in which trying new things was expected rather than just encouraged. Drugs and drink seemed to be as much a part of the environment at the time as the music itself. Furthermore, Clapton was unable to resist the appeal of a getaway from the growing demands. Alcohol initially offered that escape, numbing the fears and uncertainties that still tormented him in spite of his achievements. However, the demands and pressures increased along with his reputation, and the momentary comfort that alcohol provided was no longer sufficient. As the years went by, the simple pleasure of relaxing with a drink became into an obsession that took over his life. The allure of alcohol quickly took him in a more sinister direction. Heroin was a narcotic that offered a more thorough and profound retreat. Heroin became more than a coping strategy for Clapton. It turned into a crippling obsession. He reportedly spent $16,000 a week on heroin due to his severe addiction, an incredible amount, especially for a rock star. The drug created an imperceptible but indestructible wall around him, separating him from his friends, family, and fellow musicians. He was imprisoned in his own prison and could not be reached. His musical skills started to deteriorate as his dependence grew. Clapton, who was once a highly regarded guitarist who could electrify crowds, is now having difficulty performing. The shroud of narcotics diminished his zeal and his once legendary charisma on stage. He lost the respect of people who used to appreciate his work, since he skipped performances and made mistakes. Once a ray of hope, his career was doomed to end tragically. With every failed concert and wasted opportunity, Clapton's addiction grew out of control, leaving friends and fellow artists to watch in helpless anguish. It seemed impossible to get in touch with the man who had mesmerized audiences with his heartfelt playing, and he was fading. Then the tipping point arrived in 1971. Those closest to Clapton had to step in when his performance at a London event went so badly. Desperate to save the man they loved and revered, they banded together. Friends confronted him about how his addiction had affected his life, work, and relationships, making the intervention honest and difficult. For the first time, Clapton saw the extent of his decline, as their words cut through the haze of addiction. Clapton's close ones encouraged him to get therapy after pleading with him to do so. Although it marked a sea change, the road to recovery was far from done. Heroism was just one aspect of Clapton's struggle. Even though he was able to break free from its hold, alcohol quickly caught him in its grasp. There was a gap left by his heroin sobriety, and Clapton turned to drinking because he was ill-equipped to handle life's obstacles without a crack. The void left by heroin was filled by alcohol, which developed into a new and equally harmful addiction. This time, his addiction was considerably more pernicious, permeating every aspect of his life, and significantly harming his professional and interpersonal connections. Even though Clapton managed to get away from heroin, his fight with addiction was far from ended. Every ounce of his strength and fortitude would be put to the test on the perilous and convoluted route to recovery. Eric Clapton's personal life was a whirlpool of feelings, wants, and heartbreaks amid his struggles with addiction. Clapton was battling a love so intense that it almost broke him even as he was establishing himself as a guitar god. He had developed a profound and compulsive crush on Pattie Boyd, the wife of George Harrison, the renowned Beatle and his close friend. Pattie was more than simply a pretty woman to Clapton. She was a living representation of everything he was unable to have, a muse and an unachievable ideal. His passion for her was evident in his songs, most notably in Isla, which is brimming with unadulterated want and despair. Isla, which was released in 1970, was Clapton's supplication, a means of transforming his anguish and heartache into something timeless. However, his unrequited love lingered for years, serving as a bitter reminder of the happiness that was just out of his grasp. When Pattie and Harrison got divorced in 1979, their narrative took a new direction. After years of dissatisfaction, Pattie ultimately turned to Clapton, after her marriage to George had survived its own setbacks. After getting married, Clapton's idealized fairy tale romance was swiftly superseded by a much more sinister reality. Clapton's drinking, and the unpredictable conduct it encouraged, were taking a toll on his marriage to Patty, and his addiction was getting worse. In their lives, the same passion that had inspired him to compose Ela turned into an erratic and occasionally terrifying power. Clapton had changed from being an affectionate lover to an addict who was erratic, untrustworthy, and frequently inaccessible. Patty wondered if the man she had fallen for was irredeemable, since the man who had once promised her the world was now buried in his own darkness. Their union turned into a heartbreaking tale of love, full with difficulties that tested Patty's will. Because of his drunkenness, Clapton became erratic and prone to outbursts of wrath, a man who alternated between neglect and devotion. Later on, Patty would describe instances of his verbal and physical abuse, bringing back the agonizing reality of cohabitating with someone whose love for her seemed to take a back seat to his addiction. His concerns were exacerbated by his drinking, which resulted in mood swings, jealous accusations, and worst of all, infidelity. She could no longer identify the man who had once worshipped her. Time was insufficient to repair the wounds caused by a man's self-destructive actions. Patty also suffered because of Clapton's affairs. They were all undermining the affection and trust she had worked so hard to build. In 1986, he had an affair with Italian model Lori Delanto, with whom he had a son named Connor. This was a betrayal that deeply wounded Patty, leaving an open wound that could not be healed by an apology. Clapton's addiction wasn't the only reason for his treachery. It served as a reminder of the underlying defects that addiction had exacerbated. It was evidence of the growing emotional gap between them. After years of attempting to keep their marriage intact, Patty had finally had enough by 1988. Citing his infidelity and drinking as the last straws in a marriage that had been irreparably damaged, she filed for divorce. Losing Patty was a devastating blow to Clapton. However, he was too engrossed in his addiction at the moment to completely see the seriousness of what he was doing. Now that he had lost the lady he had once considered his savior, he had to face the destruction he had caused to their relationship. Their once passionate love story had turned into a warning, a reminder of how addiction can transform love into something else entirely, and how unresolved demons may destroy even the strongest of relationships. But even after all the heartache, Clapton would always be reminded of Patty, and the love he had wasted in an attempt to find momentary solace from his own suffering. Clapton had an unthinkable catastrophe in 1991. He and Italian model Lori Delanto had a 4-year-old son named Connor, who passed away after falling from a New York City apartment's 53rd floor window. Clapton was saddened by the death and was really grieving. He later composed the moving song Tears in Heaven, which conveyed his grief and desire. For Clapton, this time became a turning point. He had to face his addictions head-on after losing Connor, so he sought treatment and embraced recovery. He realized he had to make changes in his life in order to honor his son's memory. Clapton found it difficult to embrace sobriety. He threw himself into his music and used it as a way to express his feelings. In order to assist others in overcoming addiction, he established the Crossroads Center in Antigua in 1998. This project demonstrated his dedication to sobriety and his wish to help those going through comparable difficulties. Clapton's development as a person was reflected in his music at this time. Pilgrim 1998 and other albums revealed a more mature and thoughtful artist who had conquered his inner demons and come out of them with a newfound sense of purpose. Eric Clapton no longer hesitates to talk about his darkest moments. He can now look back with a mix of regret, grief, and acceptance thanks to time and his recuperation. He freely discusses the pain his addictions caused to his loved ones, as well as the bad decisions he made during his journey. The truth doesn't evade him. He is aware of the severe wounds his actions have caused to others, most tragically to Patty Boyd, the woman he once loved but eventually wounded. Clapton is open about his feelings of regret for the years he lost to addiction, the times he gave up for his urges, and the memories he was too hazy to experience. He has been acutely aware of the toll addiction takes on those close to the addict as a result of his path. Nevertheless, Clapton spoke fervently about the potential for forgiveness and salvation despite this sea of regret. For those who are hurting as much as for himself, his message is one of hope. For Clapton, forgiveness is more than only asking for someone else's forgiveness. He needs to forgive himself. It has taken him years to accept this process. He thinks that individuals may change. Even the most strained ties can be repaired in that life by rebuilding what was damaged. Clapton has realized that while he cannot change the past, he can utilize his narrative to show people who feel stuck that it is possible to overcome the effects of one's own actions. Clapton's tale is a potent illustration of perseverance. He has discovered a way to return to himself in spite of the devastation his addiction caused and the depths of his misery. He still shares his experience in his songs today, finding meaning in guiding others through the murky waters of addiction. With empathy derived from his own traumatic experiences, Clapton has become a voice for others who feel silenced in the throes of addiction. Through his advocacy work and music, his personal experience has given him a sense of obligation to assist others, which he carries out with quiet humility and a profound awareness of the struggles that so many people still face. Clapton describes music as his salvation. When he looks back on his life, he saw music as more than just a job or a gift. It served as a lifeline. During his darkest hours, music gave him a means of processing his suffering and expressing emotions he was unable to express verbally. He used guitar and songwriting to express his pain, his sorrow, and his need for tranquility. He was able to face his grief and, in a sense, start to heal after writing songs like Tears in Heaven, following the untimely death of his son, Connor. For Clapton, music evolved into a means of expressing his grief, seeking atonement, and, in the end, finding some inner peace. The unbreakable strength of the human spirit is demonstrated by Eric Clapton's journey. He has left a legacy that goes much beyond his music, thanks to his extraordinary talent, heartbreaking loss, and unwavering quest for atonement. His life now provides a compelling story of hope, reminding us that recovery is always possible, even in the midst of life's most difficult challenges. For Clapton, redemption is a continuous process rather than a final destination, one that he still walks with bravery, fortitude, and a silent resolve to reconcile his past. He gives people a helping hand by telling his experience, urging them to seek forgiveness, find strength in their struggles, and perhaps most importantly have faith that even the most shattered lives may be restored to wholeness.